Good day, friends. Thank you for joining me. On this video, we're going to be talking about 5 of our best-selling modulation pedals. Let's hit it. Thank you again for joining me, everyone. My name is Justin Waterfield. This is part 2 of our best-selling pedal video series. So if you haven't watched it already, we've done a video on the distortion pedals, so make sure you go and watch that one. And today we're going to be talking about 5 of our best-selling modulation pedals here at Long McQuade. Now these are pulled from our bestseller lists. Not necessarily the top 5, but definitely in the top pedals that we sell. These are in no particular order. We're not ranking anything here. This is just a good spread of what we sell here. Let's clarify something right off the bat. What exactly is modulation in terms of what these pedals are going to do? Modulation in its pure sense is changing something about your sound over time. And that something is either pitch, phase, or amplitude. Now, one thing I want you to keep in mind is we'd like you to vote on your favorite pedals. Let us know which one is your favorite, which sounds you like the best. Let us know in the comments below, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be building a pedal board for our last episode based on the pedals that get the most votes from all you fine folks out there. So you're going to dictate what's going to go on that pedal board, and we'll combine them all and see what we get. So let's start it off with the first pedal on the menu. First on the list is our phaser, which is the MXR Phase 90. This thing has been in production forever, and for good reason. It does one thing, and it does it really, really well. It is simplicity personified. It has one control, which controls the speed of the effect. So what it's doing is it's splitting your signal into 2, a dry signal and a wet signal. And the wet signal is, the pitch is being modulated up and down, and the speed of that modulation is controlled by this knob here. It's as simple as it gets. You can get really, really subtle with it. You can get really bubbly and wet. It's very cool. Now, MXR makes a bunch of different versions of this. The one I'm going to be using today is the vintage reissue script logo. It's so vintage reissue that it doesn't even have a power jack or an LED on it. It's made out of new old stock parts, so it's as close to the original thing as you can get. Now, for comparison, there is a more modern version right here as well that I can show you. This is the new block logo version with the power jack and the LED indicator. This is just made out of more modern parts that are easier to source. Essentially, it sounds the same. There are some subtle differences, but not enough to make a huge difference. So let's jump right in. The guitar I'm using today is the one you guys always see me with. This is my 58 reissue Les Paul. I have some low output PAF style humbuckers. The amp is the Trainer YCV20. This is a 20 watt EL84 amp with a Celestion greenback speaker. And then we got the pedal in between. Nice and simple. So for all of you who are curious, I am tuned to E flat standard. So it sounds a little bit lower than normal. This is my preference. So because this does not have an indicator, I'll sort of be indicating to you guys when it's on, but it should be pretty obvious when it is and when it isn't. So I'm going to give you the dry tone, and then I'm going to kick it on, and we're going to hear the wet tone start moving that knob around and get some tones. Here we go. So Right there you hear there's a lot of movement, adds a little bit of sparkle on the top end, just kind of moves a bit more, especially on sustained chords. Let's move that knob around, see what we get. So you see what I mean? It does one thing, but it does it really, really well. But also, I don't know if you guys heard this, on the lower end, when the sweep really slows down, you almost don't hear it. It's not such an obvious thing. It's got something going on. There's some sort of movement there, but you almost can't tell what it is. So even for a pedal that has just one control, it's actually got a pretty wide range of applications to it. It's definitely one to check out. It's a classic for a reason. Now it's time to talk about chorus. The chorus effect is making a comeback, as with most things from the 80s these days, and honestly, I don't know why this ever went away. It is probably one of the coolest modulation effects that you can get. It sounds great on everything. Guitars, bass, obviously synthesizers. It's one of those things that you really miss when you kick it into bypass. It just sounds so good. It makes everything sound huge. So what chorus does is, like most modulation pedals, it splits your signal up. With chorus, typically it gets split into 3, sometimes 4, however many layers the designer wants to get into. So you have your dry signal and typically 2 wet signals. And those wet signals are modulated at different rates, and they can be in terms of like phase, or it can be in terms of pitch, or a little bit of both. And those are mixed in with the dry signal, and that's what gives you that sort of choral effect. Not like choral as in like the barrier reef, choral as in like a chorus, right? A group of singers. It's made to make your guitar sound like a chorus of guitars all singing at once. That's the thinking anyways. So here we have the JHS 3 chorus. Super simple, also super affordable. This is part of JHS's 3 Series lineup. Everything in the series looks great in the plain white box, same control layout and everything. Still made in the US, by the way. This guy here has 3 controls: volume, rate, and depth. The volume control, self-explanatory, how loud the pedal is when it's engaged. The rate control, same thing like on the MXR Phase 90, it controls the rate of the modulation, how fast or how slow it's going to sweep the wet signal. And this one has a depth control, and this lets you adjust how deep that modulation goes, how big those swells and dips are of the wet signal relative to the dry signal. We're going to explore that in a little bit when we get into the demo. But the other thing here is a vibe switch, and this I'm starting to notice more and more on chorus pedals in general. This is short for vibrato switch, so it's a vibrato mode. What does that mean? Well, remember what I was saying about these pedals splitting your signal internally into dry and wet signals. The vibrato control dumps your dry signal, so it's just the wet signal. And you really hear that exaggerated movement. It almost makes you a little seasick, this pitch going up and down and up and down. And it can be kind of a cool effect, and we'll explore that right now. We're going to start off with everything right up the middle, volume, rate, and depth pointing at high noon. Then we're going to move some things around and see what kind of tones we can get. Here we go. Now the cool thing about this pedal is that it has the indicator light flashing with the rate of the modulation. So if we turn it up, you're going to see this light go faster and faster, and if we turn it down, it's just going to go slower and slower. So it's a cool visual reminder for where you have that knob set. So as you can hear, just instant 80s, right? It's Crowded House, it's Cocteau Twins, it's Depeche Mode, it's everything. It's everything you've ever heard, and it sounds so good with everything at high noon. I didn't even touch anything just yet, but let's see where we can go from here. I don't know about you guys, but like in bypass, everything just flattens out. It becomes like a two-dimensional image on a page. And then when you kick it in, it's just, God, three-dimensional loveliness. Let's keep going. This thing nails the classic chorus sounds. Like everything everything is in here with just these two controls. I'm not even touching the volume because, frankly, that's fine. Now let's see what this vibe control is going to do. And I'm just going to crank the depth here so that you guys can hear it. I'm going to over-exaggerate it for you. So normally I like really subtly set modulations. I don't like to draw too much attention to the modulation itself, but I think in vibrato mode, the higher rates with a lower depth actually sounds kind of cool. It kind of sounds like jittery, just gives your chords a little bit more energy. And I think that's, you know, kind of one of the better applications for the vibrato mode. If you're dumping your dry signal and you have no dry signal that your ear can latch onto in terms of pitch, the vibrato can sort of take you on a wild ride and make you out of tune with other instruments. But if you manage your depth and you rate accordingly, you can get some really musical stuff. This thing sounds great. Now we get to the flanger. Flanging is a little bit hard to describe. So the other pedals that we've looked at so far have dealt with some sort of pitch modulation. The flanger basically doesn't change the pitch over time. It changes the phase of the signal, the wet signal, relative to the dry signal. And what it does is it gives you movement of something. Again, it's like, talking about tone is like dancing about architecture. It's really hard to describe it, but you sort of get a little bit of a whooshing sound, a little bit of you know, things sort of expanding away from your dry signal and then coming back and then going away again. It's hard to describe. You'll have to hear it for yourself. So here today we have the Boss BF3 flanger, their classic purple, the new version of the classic purple pedal, I should say. Now, I should just pause right here and say that Boss pedals were all over our bestseller list. Boss pedals are ubiquitous. Everybody has them. But in the interest of being fair to everyone else and also giving you guys a good sampling of what other brands are out there, you know, we tried to mix it up a bit and not just take, you know, the top 10 pedals or the top 20 pedals. It would be a little bit biased. So here's our Boss entry on this list. Now this guy has controls for the resonance, for the manual, for the depth, and for the rate. And it has a couple of different modes, and this is what sets this pedal apart, is that it has a gate setting which kind of involves a little bit of a tremolo in there, so it'll like cut off your signal as well as sweeping the phase, which sounds really cool. It has the standard mode, which, you know, we'll demo in a second. It has the ultra mode, which is like the overly exaggerated mode, which we'll also check out. But it's got this cool momentary mode, and you can basically use the foot switch to just temporarily put it on, and then when you release your foot, it takes it off. So you can sort of apply the classic flanger whoosh to certain notes or certain chords or certain passages and accent those. So very, very cool feature that Boss has built in. Let's see what it sounds like. So we're going to start off as usual with everything right up the middle and see what we get. Here's the dry signal. And here's the pedal. So there is a perfect example of exactly what I was talking about. You're not hearing the pitch go up and down and in and out. It's the phase of the signal, and a lot of frequencies, as the wet signal sweeps, a lot of the frequencies get canceled out with the dry signal, and that's what creates that sort of whooshing sound, almost like the sound of something going past outside your car window, or when a jet plane goes overhead. Certain frequencies hit you before other frequencies, and there's a lot of phase cancellation. It's very, very technical, but it sounds whooshy, for lack of a better term. Let's twist some knobs and see what other tones we can get. Okay, here I stumbled on something. Check this out. So I have the depth all the way down. So the depth is controlling the sweep of the frequencies. So when it's all the way down, nothing's being swept. So the wet signal is staying put relative to the dry signal. And here you can tell when I move the manual control around where exactly that point is that the wet signal is sitting with the dry signal. Let's explore this a little bit further. So there's no movement there at all, but it kind of focuses your sound. It makes it a little nasally or a little boomy or something. It changes something there. So that's what the flanger is doing. That's what I'm talking about in terms of moving the phase as opposed to the pitch. Let's keep going. pretty cool. Flanger is definitely one of the more subtle modulations in terms of what it does and how noticeable it is and how much attention it draws to itself. But it's still really cool, especially for things like open chords and things like that. It just gives the subtlest movement to it. And, you know, I think if you want to keep the focus on, you know, the lyrics of the song or on your guitar playing, I think the flanger is probably the one to go for. Just a reminder to everyone, please vote on your favorites so far. Let us know in the comments below which pedals are your favorites so far. The intention of doing this series of videos is that we're going to tally up the votes and basically compile a pedal board out of the pedals that get the most votes. And you'll hear in the last video the kind of sounds that we're going to get out of all your favorites in combination. So be sure you're dropping us a line in the comments and letting us know what you think. Now let's jump into our next effect, which is tremolo. So far, in the other pedals we've looked at, we've had modulation of the pitch. We've had modulation of the phase of the signal. What tremolo does is it modulates the amplitude of the signal, which is the volume, so how loud or soft the signal is. And the MTG tube tremolo is really, really cool because it has some awesome, really in-depth flexibility that we're going to get into in a second. So I should point out that this pedal actually runs on a tube, but not in the way that you'd think. This tube doesn't necessarily, it's not like running through like a tube distortion or something. It's not affecting the dry signal. It's not affecting your tone really in any way. What it's doing is the tube itself is the oscillator that drives the modulation itself. And that sort of gives it a little bit more texture, a little bit more, it's a little bit imprecise, and that's what gives this pedal so much character. So, as for controls, we have 4 knobs and a switch. We have the level control, obviously. We have the speed control. We have the intensity control, which is how deep those peaks and valleys are that the oscillator gets to. And then we have this wave control, which partners with the mode switch. This is really cool. This lets you change the waveform of the oscillator from triangle wave to saw wave to square wave and all points in between with the wave knob. So what does that all mean? You know what? I'm not even going to talk about it. Let's just hear what this thing sounds like. So for this demo, what I'm going to focus on is the wave and the mode here. Speed and intensity, I mean, I'm pretty sure you guys got a pretty good idea of what those do in terms of the functionality on modulation pedals in general, just by the other stuff that we looked at. So I'm going to be focusing on these 2 controls right here. So let's kick it on with everything pointing at high noon and see what we get. Clean signal. And here's with the effect. So what it's doing there is it sounds like it's sort of bouncing the volume of the signal up and down, and that's exactly what tremolo is. I'm going to exaggerate it by turning the intensity way, way, way up, and we'll see what that sounds like. And let's turn the speed way, way down. So it's basically turning your volume knob up and down for you. Essentially, that's what that's doing. So right now, we are on what's called a sine wave, which is just a nice, smooth, up and down, sounds really, really pleasing. You know, just like the old Fender sort of tube, you know, opto tremolo, where it's turning the output tubes of the amp on and off. Let's twist this wave mode to the left. Now we're on the top setting here on the mode switch. Let's turn this to the left and get a triangle wave and see what happens. So pretty similar. Let's go all the way to the right. Okay, so you can sort of hear in the decay there, it's got a little bit of a harder drop, and I'm going to adjust the intensity so you guys can hear that. So that's that stuttering effect that I was telling you, and this is very characteristic of the blackface and the silverface Fender amps. Let's keep going. So I'm going to leave the intensity on full, and I'm going to sweep the wave knob all the way back over to the left, and we'll hear how that oscillator waveform changes. So that in itself is pretty cool, but this thing has two other modes. Let's check out the middle one. So here we're going from a saw wave, which is kind of like an isosceles triangle where it's straight up and down and then it ramps down, and that will morph into a triangle wave in the middle and then morph into a reverse saw on the other side, and this gives you really cool textures and movements to the tremolo effect. Let's dial up the intensity just a little bit. We'll start on one end of the wave control and then move it all the way to the right. So that's a perfect example of a saw wave versus a reverse saw in terms of like how it affects the amplitude. I will say about this pedal, the one thing that I really like about it is the fact that you can push these knobs right to the end of their travel at like minimum and maximum settings and still get something so useful and so musical. As I've probably said before, I find modulation best when it doesn't call attention to itself necessarily. That's just how I personally like to use modulation. But this pedal is so much fun and sounds so good when it's done to the extremes. I really like the character and the sort of weirdness and quirkiness that this lends to the chords and lends to my playing. I would absolutely use this with, set just like that, like at the extremes there, and just go with it and let that inspire my guitar playing. This is a seriously underrated tremolo pedal. You got to check this one out. Last up on the menu, we have the Electro-Harmonix MOD 11 modulator. This is for lack of a better term, a modulation factory. This is a digital pedal that actually it sort of encapsulates everything that we've been talking about so far. It has tremolo, it has phaser, it has flanger, it has chorus, it has filter modulation, it has a rotary mode, it has a univibe mode, it has basically everything under the sun all in one pedal. Now, this isn't a multi-effects per se in the same way like a Boss ME80 or a Zoom Z1N or something like that. This is a great pedal for sort of finding these little esoteric and very flavorful versions of the classic modulations, things like chorus and univibe and whatnot, because in addition to this setting knob that lets you choose what modulation you're going to do, it has a mode switch, and most of these settings have alternate modes, which you can see in the overhead there. So there's a green mode for this, and a yellow mode, and a red mode. So 3 different flavors of the vibrato mode. So you're kind of getting 3 vibrato pedals in one, and that's just on one setting. So this really lets you hone in and dial in and get as weird as you want with all of these, parameters that it lets you control. Also, what it does, if that wasn't enough, if you press and hold the mode switch, the LED starts blinking, and now these knobs become controllers for alt functions. So, for example, like the volume control down here all of a sudden becomes the color knob, and that color knob changes certain parameters depending on what setting you're on. So you can get really, really in depth with this for a pedal that essentially just has 3 knobs and a selector. This is really cool. It does need a little bit of hand-holding with the manual to tell you exactly what those modes do and what the alt controls are, or you can just go into it blind and see what you get, which is part of the fun. So because there's so many different modulations on here, I'm going to pick my 2 favorites and demo those for you. And they're not really anything that we've looked at so far, not exactly. We're going to look at the univibe setting, and we're going to look at the rotary setting. Here we go. So you might be asking, what is a univibe exactly? Univibe was an old style effect. It's not terribly popular anymore because it's a big complex circuit that needs a lot of specialized parts. But what it did back in the day is it was the precursor to what would become the chorus effect. And it's very, very juicy, very watery kind of sound. If you've ever heard Red House or Machine Gun by Jimi Hendrix, that's a sound. That's it right there, like all day long, univibe. And that's always been one of my personal favorite effects. And that's what we're going to demo for you right now. So all knobs pointing at noon, no alt functions activated. I'm going to kick it on, and we're going to twist some things around, get it sitting just right, and see how that sounds. Here we go. So right there you can hear that it's big, it's wet, it's almost got like this scoop at the bottom of the oscillator range, and it just flings you right back up, and it drops you and it flings you right back up. And that's just, that imperfection and that sort of exaggeratedness is just so appealing. Like you play blues with that on in E flat and like game over, right? You've won. Now let's flip over to the rotary mode. Rotary is essentially a rotating speaker, like a Hammond organ. If you've ever heard, that kind of stuff, like John Lord from Deep Purple, or Jimmy Smith, or any of the great B3 organ players, they usually had themselves hooked up to a Leslie, which had a motor in it that moved a speaker around and round, and it gave you a sound similar to what tremolo is, because the moving speaker could only be heard sometimes and the sound would drop out and then come back. but it also did something a little weird with the phase of it, because there would also be a rotating horn at the same time. It's a big contraption. And this rotary setting, this rotary emulation is one of the best that I've heard. So let's reset the knobs to high noon, and again, go with a dry signal, kick it on, and see what we get. So you can hear there at the top of the depth control, it almost gets into like ring mod territory and like frequency modulation. It's super cool. The other thing about this particular mode, in the orange mode, or yellow mode rather, is it introduces kind of an envelope follower, where when you play hard, the speed goes up, and then as your note decays, it will slow down, kind of like the fast-slow switch on a real Leslie. So let's hear what that sounds like. Very cool, very expressive feature. Truthfully, I didn't even know about these extra modes and these alt functions until I started researching this pedal. This is such a cool pedal to really sit down with and just sort of let the pedal dictate what you're playing and let it inspire you. It is so cool. You got to try this one out. Very underrated modulation pedal. Guys, thank you so much for spending all this time with me. I hope you got a lot of good info and a good sense of the difference between all these different types of modulation. Modulation is such a huge, vast, complicated subject, so I hope that this really taught you something. And don't forget to vote for your favorite pedal out of this bunch. Let us know in the comments below which one you like the best. The idea, again, is that we're going to put all of your favorites together on a pedal board and see how well they play together. That'll be in our last video, so keep an eye out for that. Links to all the products are in the description. Make sure you like and subscribe for more content, and do stay tuned for the next episode. We'll see you then. Ciao.